friends. Look at that.
That's so fun.
Chris, Sheila Dooley. Oh,
I
awesome.
don't know if I know Sheila
And
Dooley.
I'm pretty sure you do, Joyce McNickles. And I'm super excited that Tamisha is not on camera, but I don't think you guys have ever met, and I've been wanting you to meet.
No, I
Troy's wife,
haven't.
Tamisha. Yay.
Troy's partner.
She
Hi.
said
Hi,
hi.
Tamisha.
We're expecting
Hi,
a
Sheila.
show.
Oh, and Judy, we're so glad you're here.
Oh,
We
hi,
can't
Judy.
see you, but we see
You can't
Judy's
see me?
iPhone.
Wait a minute, you can't see me?
We can't. We just see Judy's iPhone. We can see Judy M's cat. Judy, you have the best cat setup. Well, look at that cat tree. There's a window. That's a really great cat setup. Well, welcome everybody. We are so glad you are here with us on Trauma Training Tuesday Snow Day edition, which is great because I know that some of people that are usually at school are able to join us. Whoops, my cat's already causing trouble. If you didn't get to see the first one, it is recorded at our website, worcesteraxe.org. I think we shared it, but we can probably just jump right in at any point. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce my bestie, Dr. Joyce McNickles.
I thought I was your bestie.
You are too, Jude. You can have more than one. I guess Bess and Sandy.
Yeah, you got to be careful about that, Amy, saying bestie.
Yeah, you're right. Oh my God, no. So many people that I love are on one screen. I'm just like overjoyed with it all. But Joyce, it's really awesome to actually see Joyce in action, because when I met Joyce, it was like bestie love at first sight, because I met her she was engaged in this work. And she was doing training on racism and the implications of racism and the impact. And I was definitely moved enough that I was like, I want to work with her. And I made that happen. And that's a beautiful thing. Right?
I'll come in.
Yeah. So it's really great to have so many people here. I know Joyce has single-handedly influenced a lot of people and really helped them much better understand how racism shows up, and kind of what to do about it. This has been her kind of soul work since she was a young person, right? Like, I think we've known each other for more than 25 years, and we're super young, so we were like babies when we started doing this.
So young.
Yeah, it's impactful work. It's really meaningful. And it's great to see so many friends on here today I know are also engaged in racial justice work, and that is amazing. So thank you all so much. I will be quiet now and turn it over to Joyce.
All right, I am going to really try to avoid having to have Amy do the slides. I'm going to try this myself, and it's a little bit tricky because I want to be able to see my notes and share my screen. So I think I got it, but hold on one second here, and I am going to and I think you guys can see my slides sort of, right? Wait, hold on. No.
Yeah, it's just the Windows screen.
Okay, so hold on one second. I'm going to stop that share, and I'm going to share.
We practiced, just a few minutes.
Yeah, of course we did.
And
it's like, yeah, okay. I think I want to do screen 2. Okay. Now you see the Windows screen, right? Yes, okay, but that's fine, because what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go
to your PowerPoint. There it is.
Okay. All right. So
that looks right.
Everyone be patient with me today. And Amy has this tendency. I've known Amy for actually over almost 30 years, actually. And she has this tendency to be like my #1 cheerleader, and which is great, but great. Like I don't want to she oversells me. So
I don't stop it. Can't be oversold.
Yeah, and it all depends on what's going on for me in my life, how well I'm going to show up. So, but I'm going to try to show up my best today. So, just as a disclaimer, many of you know I have a little dog named Haggis, and he can be highly problematic. And so, I was actually going to bring him to a sitter today, because I'm like, he just cannot be running in and out of my office while I'm trying to do this. But, you know, with weather and all, I just like, let him stay. So he's in the other room, occupied with a lot of chew toys. So, but if I yell, haggis, it's not because I have a craving for some haggis, okay? It's because I need to just have him stop doing whatever he's doing. So you have, I hope most of you had reviewed the session from before. I'm not going to do an overview, a detailed recap of that, but I do want to just do a couple of things around like what, just so that we all start off at the same place, right? Of microaggressions. Today is the part 2, which I naively thought I was going to be able to do in the first session, and I should have known that that wasn't going to happen because I've done this before for HR people, and it's always ended up being 2 separate sessions. So, but anyway, I'm going to go through this quickly. Just sorry about that. I just need to advance stuff because I don't want to do like the slide sort of view. Because
it has a little like window on my screen. There's a window that's giving you a menu.
Yeah, I'm going to get rid of that right now.
Oh, good. Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
oops,
perfect.
sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, why isn't that letting me do that? Sorry, hold on a second. Okay.
So lots of people have joined us since we first started,
Okay,
and I'm really
good.
glad
All
that
right.
they're like, I see people from Edwards Street is here. Sean Harris, our old friend in racial
Okay,
justice, who
good.
now works at QCC, is here. So I'm just so delighted that so many people are here and people that will benefit from this information
Okay,
that you
great.
are going to share with us.
Okay.
And now everything looks perfect.
Okay, all right. So anyway, we talked last time about well, a couple of things. We need to at least notice that when we use the word microaggressions, that we're not necessarily suggesting that by using the word micro, that these things that happen to target groups are small, right? They're not small. The residual effects time after time, day after day, over time, it's just like those little cuts that we get, or the little stings that we get from when we get bitten by a mosquito. You know, we can get multiple mosquito bites over time. It, you know, really causes a lot of harm. So there's not to suggest that they're small things. One of the reasons why we call them microaggressions is because they happen, they appear on the surface to be inconsequential, right? But they're not, right? And so it doesn't mean that we can reduce the whole totality of racism, sexism, and all the other isms to a microaggressive act. Microaggressions really is just pointing to, like, at the individual level, the things that targeted group members experience. And now there is such an idea of like the macro aggressions, which really, reflects the institutional policies and practices that are targeting other groups, right? And so we're going to focus on the microaggressions. So essentially, let me just move this. Microaggressions, it's just those, I shouldn't say just because that's suggesting that they're small, but microaggressions are they're often brief, commonplace, those daily verbal, the behavior, environmental indignities that people experience, right? And it doesn't matter that they're intentional or unintentional, but they can be one or the other. And the consequences is that they're communicating a message to the target that's hostile, derogatory, or negative for that particular group. And, I had said before how we're going to try to focus on microaggressions as they relate to race, but we know that other identity groups other marginalized identity groups experience microaggressions. I'm going to lean more towards focusing on the racial microaggressions. Okay, so I'm going to move forward, and this is what I just, I make that distinction between the micro not being small. And again, moving really quickly through this, we spent much more time before, why they matter, and they matter no matter what the environment is, but they matter in the workplace for these particular reasons, right? So it for the individual, in terms of the individual's well-being, when you're experiencing these types of aggressive acts on a daily cumulative basis, I think many of you know that the impact to our physical and mental health can be severe, right? And so in terms of the work environment, when we're experiencing them at work and most likely experiencing them when we leave work, it can contribute to us not showing up emotionally, physically, actually physically at work. So absenteeism and feeling just like we're undervalued because of the microaggressions we experience. And because we are feeling undervalued, and essentially we are undervalued, it can make it harder for us because of the emotional well-being, applying for certain types of jobs, thinking that we're not going to get the job, having the confidence and the self-assertiveness to negotiate better salaries, to strive for promotions. Okay. And so I went quickly to look at how we don't want to reduce racism and the other forms of oppression to being these daily acts of hostility that people of color experience. While those are critical for our well-being and for our own liberation to know that we're experiencing those, we need to put this in a context, right? So people tend to look at microaggressions as an easier way sometimes to deal or to think about racism, right? It's they see a behavior and to focus on, okay, how do we stop biased behavior? How do we stop these biased attitudes? And those are important things to be thinking about for sure. But at the same time, you can't think about those things without realizing there's something underneath, right? So when someone says to an Asian American who has been here, her family has been here for 4, 5 generations, where are you from? And she says, I'm from Boston. No, really, seriously though, where are you really from? Okay, so that's a microaggression as we used as an example last time. But what's that sitting on top of? That's what we really want to get at, right? And so is sitting on top of stereotypes about who an American is, right? And that stereotypes informs the person's attitudes towards the individual that they're not even conscious of often, that implicit bias. And so we can think about like, how is it centered around, how is it built upon a particular form of oppression? And in this case, it's, racism, right? And so I want people to, although we're talking about microaggressions today, I want people to start thinking about how these microaggressive acts are really the result of what's going on underneath, right? The iceberg. Okay. And I'm just going to move through here. I don't want to do that. And no. Okay. And then we talked about, we talked about how there are different levels of microaggressions. And so, and in fact, I gave Amy before the session an article that, she's going to put on the website. And that article is actually it's informing a lot of what I'm going to do with you for strategies today. But anyway, so, but this information is from another article by Daryl Wing Su. And so we look at microaggressions on different levels, right? So the micro assaults, so that's the one that people tend to kind of see, right? Like, oh, okay, I can see how that's a racist thing. Some people wouldn't even necessarily say that should be considered a microaggression. It's it's just racist. Well, it is racist, but these are the kinds of things that people of color experience on a day-to-day basis, right? So that assault is a really explicit and conscious verbal or nonverbal attack, and is very intentional to meant to hurt the victim, right? Through name calling, there's visual displays of their racism or their homophobia when we talk about other identity groups who experience microaggressions. So all of those things are the micro assaults. And then we can look at micro insults. And I love the way how Daryl Wing Sue kind of teases out these different levels of that, because it makes it a little bit easier to recognize. I think when sometimes we talked about this before, how you don't always know when you're experiencing a microaggression. You don't like, you're like, well, what was that? You sort of like, wait, that, because it can be very much disguised sometimes, like because of how the person is expressing the microaggression. So even like when somebody says to a young woman, and most women have heard this when if you play sports, it's like, you really don't even play like a girl, she plays really like a guy, right? So that, whatever the sport is, right? And so that is, can be disguised vaguely, you're like, wait a minute, I know that's not a compliment, but it feels like, are they trying to suggest to me that I'm kind of good at this? Or because it feels kind of icky, right? And so what I like about the way that these are separated out is that it helps us to see that whatever it is that's being hurled at us, that they're invalidating, right? And whether it's an insult, or it's in an assault or in an invalidation, which is going to come up next. So even like when we talked about this before, when somebody says, well, geez, you don't even act like you're gay. Okay. Now we know that's an insult, right? But sometimes when we hear things like that or similar things, like we don't know if we should always like, how do we stop? Like, what do we say to that? Right. The person's not doing the sort of blatant assault, but this is clearly an insult, right? And so I like how we can think about microaggressions and manifesting in different ways. So it's communication that's rude, insensitive, and demeans our identity, as in both of those statements. And obviously that bottom statement is often reserved for, Black people and other people of color, but it tends to be particularly reserved for Black people. Even the President Obama, I think it was his own vice president that said that to him, right? It was it was Biden that had said once that he's so articulate. He said it about him. And so what's underneath that, we always talked about the meta communication. The meta communication for that one is like, okay, you surprised me because you're Black and Black people aren't supposed to be articulate. That's the meta communication. Micro insults and micro invalidations often have a meta communication. That's the message behind the statement. You don't even act gay. The message behind the statement is, okay, I have in my mind, because of my own stereotypes and my own implicit bias, which is sitting under the iceberg on top of homophobia and heterosexism and heteronormativity, right? The normalizing of heterosexual behavior. I have in my mind that a gay person acts like this, and you don't act that way. So I'm puzzled by that, right? So these are ways that our identity, our existence, our reality is invalidated. They're snubs, they're frequently unknown to the perpetrator, frequently, not always, obviously, but convey a hidden insulting message, as I mentioned before. They're not always intentional, and as I said before, they occur due to some underlying bias outside of our awareness often. And Amy, I'm not looking at the chat or anything like that. So, feel free to stop me as I'm going through this, if somebody has a question or whatever. And then the micro invalidations, we invalidate, negate or undermine the thoughts and feelings of a reality of a person in a target group. I don't think Joe is being racist. You're insensitive, that's all. Why do you even have to mention that you're gay? I don't tell people that I'm straight. Who cares, right? So like that's a clear invalidation of a gay person's lived experience, right? So a gay person's lived experience has told him or her that you need to be conscious and aware of your sexual orientation for your own safety even, right? So as a heterosexual person, I don't need to do that, right? I don't need to care about that, right? For my own safety and well-being. So that is a clear invalidation of my lived experience. And I don't even want to go there with the All Lives Matter. We talked about that. That's a clear invalidation of Black people's experiences particularly. All right, so I'm just going to move through and I don't want to do the slide sorter because, okay. So experiencing a microaggression can lead to the following intrusive thoughts. Did I interpret that correctly? Did she just say what I think she said? You know, what was really meant by that? Should I say something? And you can imagine all of the just the energy that goes into on a daily basis at work, at, you know, just being out in the community, when you're trying to assess what happened, why, you know, what, and then let's not even talk about the intersectional aspect of it, right? Sometimes I don't know if things are happening to me because I'm Black or it's because I'm a woman. I don't know. Sometimes they're both at the same. Sometimes it's because I'm a Black woman, right? So all that is going. That there's a lot of energy that goes into just daily living with these microaggressions. You think you have to start thinking, do they probably think I'm overacting? If I speak up, is it going to hurt more than it helps? And then we look more at the psychological impact of it, which is around, you know, we can end up with depression, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, a feeling of helplessness, a loss of drive, and just as I mentioned, those intrusive cognitions. And then we did an activity where I asked people to think about, you know, what a microaggression that they experience and what do they think is the message behind the message, and not that it really matters what the person's intentions were, but it will when you start to think about how are you going to make an intervention, right? Like what's the best approach if you choose, because we don't have to make an intervention. And then I'm just going to move through. And now want to look at that. And so now we're going to start the interventions, right? So I'm going to stop right here for a second because I'm looking at two screens on my desk. My notes, my laptop has my notes screen, and then my monitor has the PowerPoint that you're looking at. So I don't really want to go back and forth with the chat. Amy, is there
just
anything?
have one comment in the chat. Tamisha kind of jumped in, and Tamisha, feel free to jump in if you want about what it really is like when you're the only or one of a few. It really, I don't mean to speak for you, Tamisha, if you want to say anything.
Tanisha, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I was really just thinking about what you were saying and how the different you know, the thing that plays in your head whenever you hear a microaggression, you're kind of doubt yourself at first.
Yes.
You're like, wait, did they just mean that? Like, oh,
right.
it feel your body just like it reacts first, so you know something's wrong, but you're kind of like, well, maybe I'm making too much of it or whatever. And as you said, as a Black woman, I was just thinking like, yeah, when you're the only Black woman, it's like that level up, right? Because then there's nobody to go to and be like, would you have taken it this way? That kind of
right.
So
And
that's all I
Keisha,
was saying.
I mean, Tanisha,
Tamisha with an M.
If the M, Tamisha. So what is it like? I mean, I think I know the answer, but if you don't, from my own experience, but what is it like when you're using that energy on a daily basis to ask yourself those questions? How does that affect the way you show up in your work environment?
It's exhausting. It's exhausting because I spend a lot of my time I think the sum of it all is I wonder if I'm in the right job or if I'm doing the right things. I'm constantly self-doubting, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like um whether or not I'm in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I come from. I always feel like I'm like, did I do this right or did I say that right or
Yeah.
should I say something? And I go back and forth between advocating for myself because I know there are people who support me in the workplace too. But it's kind of like, I don't know. I've had times where people have said, "Oh, don't worry, they're just being, blah 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 blah. They didn't mean that,"
Mm-hmm.
and that's, then I'm kind of feeling validated. So
Thanks. Yeah.
yeah.
Louise has her hand up too.
Okay.
Louise is here. Yay, Louise.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Louise.
Sorry for my camera being off. I just got in from work. But I just wanted to jump in and say, and just add into what she's saying, right? On how you feel, when you're not sure about these microaggressions or when they're coming at you, right? And you see them and you want to address them and you do address them, but it's just pushed under the rug.
Yeah. Right.
That's one of the biggest things I think I have a problem with is when they just push it under the rug. Like,
Yeah.
you say, oh, wait, hey, this was just said. And it's like, oh, they didn't mean it that way. It's okay, but no, yeah, they meant it that way because they said it that way,
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the hardest things to deal with is when it wants to go unrecognized.
Yeah. So it's like you experienced the microaggression, which is traumatizing in and of itself and invalidating and infuriating. And then when you share what happened to you, you're invalidated a second time.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use just a little point here. So I just took a case manager's training course, right? And it was an accelerated one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was when they said accelerated, it was accelerated, right? So much so a lot of people started struggling with it. But I had struggles from day one. And it was that the computer that they provided for us, it didn't work for 3 weeks. But I'm continuously being told, oh, you're so great, you're wonderful, you're a team player. In the end, if you're not cut up with everybody else, we'll give you the time. But then when I came back to it and mentioned it, it was like, oh no, no, no. It was like they still expected me to be right along with everyone else when I'm 3 weeks behind because of them, And when I got angry about it and I spoke to the supervisor, the first thing came out of her mouth to me was, we can talk, but I don't want everybody around us hearing the conversation.
Okay. And so I'm curious.
And I had to step back and say to myself, wait, what did she just say? What do you mean you don't want everybody around us hearing the conversation? So as we go outside and we're talking, and I guess to her, my voice was elevating.
Oh,
She
okay.
said to me, you're getting louder.
Yeah. Okay.
And I
Yeah.
had to say to her, you know what? I'm not going to conversate. We're going to end this conversation here and now. I said, because I don't need your biases, because that's what I'm hearing. And your stigmas, because now you're pushing them off on me and you're telling me that I'm yelling.
Yeah.
And I said to her, and I'm not yelling. So,
And
when you run into things like that.
yeah, that's exhausting. And then you have to, like I showed in the previous slide, you have to do this sort of calculus in your head. Will it cause more harm to me if I push back and speak up, right? However, at the same time, you want to always maintain, there's a desire for all of us to maintain our own sense of agency, right? And not to feel like we're helpless, right? So, and then when you are in the position of experiencing the microaggression with a supervisor, this is when you actually end up having to do the deep calculus, right? Of how much more harm would this cause for me if I spoke up. So these are all of the things that we, as members of different target groups experience, right? And, you know, it was sharing an example, you know, I'm sharing Tamisha sharing her example as a Black woman, and Louise is a Black woman. And I think we could probably, if I'm looking, I'm not looking at any of you right now, but like, I don't see your faces, but if I were to ask people, you know, think about your various targeted, marginalized identities, you probably have similar stories where you can talk about, supervisors or colleagues responding and reacting to you based on a stereotype about people in your group and how they are, how they're going to react, how they're going to communicate. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move into the strategy tools for disrupting and intervening. So let's see. So when we talk about the microaggressions, we also want to talk about the micro interventions, right? So just as you can have the everyday slights, the negative comments, behaviors that demean and undermine and invalidate a person, as microaggressions do, there's the concept of micro interventions, right? The everyday words or deeds, whether they're intentional or unintentional, that communicates to the targets of the microaggressions that there's their value as a person, the affirmation of who they are and their group identity. It communicates to the person support and encouragement, and it communicates to the person a reassurance that they are not alone. So these are some of the ways to think about why we want to do the micro interventions. And so I know, so in this series that Amy has been doing since the pandemic, called Trauma Training Tuesdays, I've been able to join a couple of them, and I actually did participate. I was not co-facilitated, but I was like a guest facilitator, I guess, if you will. I'm not sure how Amy would frame it, with Reverend Aaron Payson on the trauma of loss. And I was speaking about my grief, as many of you know, of losing my life partner, you know, to COVID, after having not been able to see him for 6 weeks while he was in the hospital. And so we talk about how the trauma gives you ongoing stress that has to be managed in some way, right? Whether you're conscious of the stress or not. And grief is interesting because it certainly is one of those traumas that you're not always conscious of how that is informing how you show up, right? And so, you know, I was saying to Amy, as I get ready to do this microaggressions session with you all, I really am not centering it around trauma the way that some of the other sessions were, but we know that microaggressions cause trauma. And so I started looking up things around, you know, what's in the literature around how to make, how to do interventions around microaggressions. And one of the things that I found, and it's in the article that Amy's going to share with you, is that this particular article, as they frame in the interventions, and explicitly state how there's some borrowing of concepts from what's in the psychology literature around how one copes and manages with stress. And so whether it's stress that's related to a past trauma or stress that is related to something that you're going on in your life. And so the idea is that there's two forms of there's two focuses, I should say, when you think about managing stress. The emotion focus, coping, right? So the trying to figure out ways to cope with the emotionality that's attached with the stress. And then there's the problem focus aspect of it. So looking at ways to manage the problem, which is causing the stress. The problem in the environment that's causing the stress. So when we are thinking about the micro interventions in this context, in terms of the managing the emotional aspects of the harm that it's doing to the individual, we're looking at interventions that are going to increase the psychological well-being of the individual, the target. and then provide allies. Ooh, that should be a comma after allies. Allies, and we can talk about that as a contested term later. Allies and bystanders with a sense of control. So and we do think about the emotional internal life of the allies and the bystanders here in terms of like, what can we do for interventions to move them to a place where they're feeling more equipped and more empowered to make, if they choose to make appropriate interventions. And then we're going to be looking at, okay, what are the tools to disarm the perpetrator, right? And counteract what that person has done. That's more looking at the problem focus, right? So we're looking externally here outside of the target group or the person who is witnessing the microaggression. And so then we're going to think about how we can look at the external in terms of like the environment, right? So you disarm the perpetrator, right? But then what's going on in that workplace environment that has contributed to sort of like when you think about like a fish in a fish bowl, right? The water has its own, it's its own environment. It has its own ecosystem, right? Ecosystem. And so workplaces are like an ecosystem, right? There's things in that system, there's things in that water that are either going to be contributing to the well-being of the fish or it's going to be distracting from it. Okay, so we think about those, the things in the water that we can make some interventions around. And so social scientists, and so they propose several reasons for people failure to act. So again, the article Amy's going to share with you, it's Daryl Wing Su, who did a lot of writing about microaggressions, and some of his colleagues, they reviewed literature that people who were activist scholars had written about from their own experience and their own observations, what people needed, what tools people had when they made appropriate interventions, what worked, what didn't work. What are some of the barriers for people not acting? And the bystanders, which you're going to talk about in a minute, who tend to be the largest number of folks that I believe that are contributing to the continuity of the environments being not hospitable to these target groups. They have different reasons why they don't respond and intervene than the person who's the target, for example. So the invisible, I'm just going to put these all up here. Okay, so what they found is that for many people, whether they're they're the target or the bystander, the failure to act is because there's such the way that the modern forms of bias, in this specific case, I'm talking about racial bias, for example, how it looks, how it shows up, right? It's not that it's invisible, but it's sort of like doesn't look as blatant as things might have looked before, right? So we saw that image of the micro assaults where, the KKK was holding the signs, right? I mean, that's just like in your face. That's visible. That's so covert. We're trained to see, covert, so overt. We're trained to see that, right? I mean, how do you not see that, right? It's these everyday things as like, Tamisha and Louise were describing, people saying these little things that they may appear to be benign, but they're not, right? Because they're invalidating who you are and that's undermining your well-being. So particularly for the bystander, why they might not interrupt, because they just don't have the kind of nuanced perspective. I should be able to see nuances, to be able to see these subtle ways that racism shows up. So when they hear a colleague say something that is not blatantly in your face kind of a racist comment, then I show like, well, she meant well, she was just curious about where, where so-and-so was from. I ask people all the time, where are you from? I mean, I don't know why that would upset somebody. So these kinds of things are making it harder for the bystander to intervene because they're not able to see the subtleties of invalidation, dismissiveness of someone's experiences. Trivializing an incident as just innocuous, it doesn't matter, and it's easy for a person who's in the dominant group to trivialize an incident because those things don't happen to them, right? They seem minor to the person in the dominant group as a bystander, for example, because, well, you know what? I don't experience that. And so they tend to reduce things to down. That can happen to anybody, right? But it doesn't happen to anybody. And then another thing that stops people from reacting and intervening is like, well, I don't know, especially in the workplace, am I supposed to do, I'm not like HR, am I supposed to say something to Bob when he said something to Carol? Why should I don't want to get involved. Like, that's not my role. So people not really being clear about where the responsibility lies, that thinking that it lies primarily with the department or the person who is, that's within their explicit purview, right? And then some of us talked about this, some of you talked about the fear of retaliation, not just for the target person for intervening, that's one of the barriers, but for the observer, the bystander. Like, I don't want to be seen as somebody who, who's getting involved and therefore the person who made the comment is going to react and respond to me negatively later. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have an image in this work environment that I'm someone who's stirring things up, right? Because that comes with retaliation. The person's not a team player because they're always getting into stuff and creating things and seeing things that aren't, they're seeing things and allegedly creating problems that aren't really problems. So the retaliation factor is profound for bystanders as well. Obviously not as profound for the target, but it's still something that people think about. And then this is a big one for people, just not knowing what to do. And again, this is because people don't have a deep analysis of what actually is going on in terms of, like, how is this a reflection of racism or other forms of oppression? And I don't know if I should say something to, like, I'm witnessing what happened to Louise at work, right? I heard her supervisor say, I'd like for you to step outside, but I don't know if I should say, how do I do that? Like, if I say, say if I were a white person, I don't know, like, is Louise gonna think that I'm getting into her business and I think that she can't manage this situation and she can't stand up for herself? I don't want to seem paternalistic. I don't know what to do, right? So all of these things are part of what can go on for people as they are trying to decide if they want to intervene. I'm going to stop for a second. Because again, I'm not sure what people, I don't want to click onto the chat window because I'm really like, my fear is I'm not going to be able to get back to the setup that I have. So Amy, is there anything that I need to?
No, nothing new in the chat. Just
Okay.
sort of, I shared the article and the website where the article's posted and where your part 2 will be posted. This is really helpful though, to kind of drill down even more on what's going on.
Okay. And then I can take
Can I say
questions.
something, Amy?
Please.
Judy.
It's Judy.
So I can draw an analogy of what Joyce is talking about regarding concerns about racism to concerns about women being promoted. Amy, I think you're aware of the things that we did at UMass Medical School, that it was very clear and at the time I was becoming vice provost for women. And I looked at the data and I said, wait a minute, why are all these men promoted and no women are being promoted to upper levels, like a professor, for example, or a professor? And at that point, it was important not just to observe it, as Joyce is saying, but also to get the data and say, let me really look at what's happening here. And I looked at it and I saw that women who had and I compared their characteristics, how many publications have they had, how much have they taught. And I saw that women who were much higher in these qualitative and quantitative characteristics were not being promoted. And so in that case, it was important to get data and demonstrate that, hey, look, this is wrong. And it was hard at first to speak up, because there was this whole group of men, about men who were very strong in their ways. And at times I felt marginalized by them. I said, it's really, to myself, it's really important that I do speak up, even though it was hard, but I'm in a good position to get the data to demonstrate it. And there were about 10 women that I found just very easily should have been promoted and weren't. And I pointed it out to their chairs, and their chairs said, I didn't really know this. Thank you for letting me know. So in that case, I know that we're not always thanked for the things that we point out, but in that case, it was very important to show that there was data that demonstrated this marginalization and lack of attribution to women in the same way as men. There's a lot of similarities.
It's so clear from your example too, Judy, how that harms everyone, right? If only men, and I'm sure race was a big, I'm sure it was a lot of white men. If they're the only ones teaching in medical school, that they do have a lot, that's really impactful on everybody who's not in their group.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you made an intervention.
Yes.
You made an intervention. I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to work in small groups to do some conceptualizing of what intervention you want to take for and why you chose that particular strategy, because there are different ways. So we have goals when we make the intervention. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but there are different strategies you can use, right? So you used, this was what you were addressing, right? The systemic piece that creates the microaggressions in that organization, right? And so you chose a strategy, an intervention that was about educating, right, people, right? Educating the offender, which was the institution. And you did that education through a collection of data and showing them the data, right? And so I think why these things become so overwhelming to us is because there's multiple moving parts, right? It's become overwhelming in terms of the paralysis comes in because we don't know what to do, right? Because we're looking at we're looking at the entire system, and we're looking at what happens to me or you as an individual, right? That microaggression that happens there. We're looking at the system or the water in the bowl that has allowed this to happen or makes it easier for this to happen. But if we can break it down in terms of okay, what's my strategy for dealing with this particular issue with the individual microaggression? what's my strategy for making an intervention around the systemic piece. When we can sort of break it down that way, it does not become as overwhelming for us as whether we're a bystander or the target. Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm gonna move to the next one. So what's our role, right? And what's our role? Well, it depends in disrupting. It depends on who we are, right? Whether we're the target, the bystander, and the ally. And I'm gonna go into each one of these, okay? So the bystander is anyone can be a bystander. Anyone who becomes aware of and or witnesses unjust behavior or practices that are worthy of comment or action. So in Judy's case, Judy was a bystander and a target, actually, because Judy is a woman and she is in the group that was experiencing the larger systemic microaggression, right? So you can be anyone can become a bystander if you witnessed it. But now I'm using that term bystander specifically for people who are, so I said Judy can be a bystander, but when I use this term bystander, based on what you've can see in the article, they're really kind of referring to the people who witness and don't have any kind of deep awareness, right? Okay, so what's happening? So it's that, and just to delineate between, targets and allies being bystanders, is that these bystanders are the people who don't have any deep awareness, right, of the policies and practices that are inequitable. And why we want to make that distinction is because how we make what that person can do, what they're capable of once they do come into some awareness, and is a little bit different than someone who is a target and also someone who witnesses the unjust behavior, and they just happen to be in that same group, as in Judy's case, right? So the strategies are going to be different. The bystander with the superficial awareness, that's really, the largest group of people in our society, right? They really just don't have a clue to interrupt. Now, I mean, certainly there's levels of awareness and stuff, but the reality is if we had, a majority of bystanders with some deep analysis and with the will and the skill, we wouldn't be in the situation, will and skill to do something. We wouldn't be where we are today, and I wouldn't be doing this workshop. Okay, so that's just the reality. So for the bystander, these are the things that they found are required for them to be able to take action. They have to have the ability to recognize acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. I know that sounds really simple, because the folks that are on this Zoom right now, I don't know all of you, but you're showing up here, so I'm guessing that you can recognize, a lot of unacceptable behaviors, right? But there are a lot of people who can't. And again, there's the ability to recognize comes over time and with skill. So many of I was married to my husband for almost 30 years, white guy, 19 years older, and his capacity for being able to recognize what's unacceptable behavior in terms of white people and their foolishness, right? That got better over time because he had a deeper analysis over time, because he was in proximity to me and my lived experience, because he read a lot of things that I gave him, right, to read. And so he was able to, over time, see some of those subtleties of things that other people with his same identity, constellation, being white male, heterosexual male, white heterosexual Christian able-bodied male, may not have been able to see. Now, how he was later as in our marriage was, again, a lot different than at the beginning, because he deepened his perception skills, right? So, and that takes some time, and that can happen through education, having meaningful and not sort of like tokenized relationships with people of color. Awareness of the, so another thing that they need to see and they need to have to be able to take action is awareness of the positive benefits that come to the target. The positive benefits that the target, the perpetrator, the bystander, and the organization will get through taking action, right? And yes, there are positive benefits to a perpetrator if the bystander takes action. Well, for one thing, the perpetrator, if the bystander intervenes in a way that is effective, the perpetrator, the benefit is that the perpetrator is not going to do that anytime soon, and that will in turn make it better for the perpetrator working with his or her colleagues, right? That's a benefit, right? And obviously the organization is going to benefit if a bystander takes action, because hopefully the bystander not only shows the target person that they're not alone in terms of like, I see you, I see what's happening to you, but the bystander also communicates that this is a situation that we as an organization need to do something about. We need to change the water. We need to change the structure of the water here. And having a toolkit for the bystander is a necessary thing for them to take action. And so, and I mean a literal toolkit, right? Like with scenarios that might play out, right? And having the in fact, let me just move to it, having the bystander practice those strategies, all right? And you guys are gonna be doing that today, actually. And having trainings around how to make appropriate interventions. I did some trainings for our local Human Resource Management Association. And so they're like HR people from Central Mass companies. And, we spent a whole session on they identified scenarios that played out, and then they got to practice using some of these intervention strategies. And that gave people a lot of confidence to step in as a bystander. And now the ally, I say it's a contested term because some people talk about allies versus disruptors. I'm going to limit this to talking about allies at this point in the context of this conversation. And these are the people who they have a deeper analysis and be able to perceive what's going on than the bystander who has a superficial analysis and doesn't really understand what's acceptable and unacceptable. These are folks who have already in their personal lives, taken action, and they've, taken it upon themselves to not be actively anti-racist. I mean, actively racist. They've decided that they're going to be anti-racist. And so they are people who are more than, they're not just simply not just going to refrain from doing racist things and committing microaggressions. They have a strong desire to actually do stuff to stop it. Okay. And so they actively support targets by actively working towards eliminating the prejudicial practice they witness in both their personal and professional lives. They're motivated to take action at the interpersonal and the institutional level. So what they decide to do for intervention is going to look different than what a bystander is going to do, because their analysis is a little bit deeper and their commitments deeper. Now, targets, what are they going to do, right? What determines how they're going to respond? What's their role? Well, targets, remember we talked about the focus of how to manage the stress. It's like the emotional aspects of the stress, and then the external aspects of what's causing the stress in the environment. So the targets are people who are objects of the prejudice and discrimination. express, right? So we know that. Now, their first rule, I hate that expression, rule of thumb, but I don't want to change that. That's what the authors do, but I'm changing it. Their first thing is to take care of themselves. So their focus is on the emotional healing, the emotional care, self-care, right? That's not necessarily, their knee-jerk reaction is not necessarily on the external. It may get to that point, fixing the environment, but the focus really initially really needs to be like, just take care of your of what's going on for you, and that can show up in different ways, right? And we're gonna look at, I'm gonna show you this chart later. You're gonna see that can look very different. Different ways of coping and self-care. It could be like just social support, talking with your friends about what happened later, talking with them later. It could be like even having colleagues at work. This is why affinity spaces at work are so important, where people can have a safe space to go and talk about what's happening. And then, let's see, just if the target chooses to have in their toolkit a sort of like a repertoire of responses. I know I have some responses when because it's likely I'm going to get the same stuff all the time that people are going to be saying to me. Sometimes it depends on your mood too. It depends on how much energy you want to spend. Sometimes I feel like being really in your face, explicit about my comeback, my verbal comeback when somebody says something. And sometimes I want to use humor to sort of like undermine what what they're saying, and sort of just poke fun, if you will, at the comment, but in a humorous way that leaves a person thinking, oh, I didn't think about that. And we'll look at some examples in a minute. Okay. And also oops, let me go back. I don't want to do that. Isn't that sorry, folks? I want to do, okay, sorry. Let me go back to the next one. All right, so the strategic goals of interventions, of the micro interventions. 4 things. Our goal in doing an intervention is 4. We have 4 different goals. To make the invisible visible, we'll talk about each one. Immediately disarm the microaggression, educate the offender, and seek internal reinforcement or support. These are not necessarily things that every person is going to do, the bystander, the ally, the target will do. And sometimes we do one and we don't do the other one. Sometimes we do one now and then we do the other one later. Like we just point out what was the microaggression, make it visible. And then maybe a few days later, we go back and we educate. And then sometimes we just go and seek internal reinforcement or support. And I'll talk about that. All right. And so making the invisible visible. And remember I told you how like the whole idea of like why microaggressions can be overwhelming for people to sort of, know what to do about it is because they're not quite sure. For many people, they're not quite sure, like, it doesn't seem like it was explicitly racist, but I don't know, something was weird about that. Like, I don't know, like what was that, right? And so, but it's easier to deal with it if we make visible what's really going on. Now, in order to make visible what was, so basically identify the meta communication behind the communication. Once we do that, it's a lot easier for us to make the intervention with that individual. But if we don't know what the meta communication is, we're not going to be able to do that. And this is why, as I said before, bystanders can get stuck because they have a hard time knowing what's acceptable and not, and what is not acceptable. Okay. And so, so for example, when somebody says, I think I mentioned this earlier as an example. You speak English really well. Like, where are you from? And the person says, well, I'm from Boston. No, but really, really, where are you from? Okay. So that is an invalidation, micro invalidation. So how do you make that visible to the person, right? So my goal is to make that visible to the person. So my tactic is to perhaps either undermine that communication and to name and make it explicit, right? So let me back up for a minute because I'm skipping ahead of myself. The objective.
Louise has her hand raised, Joyce. I
Oh,
don't know.
sorry. Louise, go ahead.
I have a
Yeah.
question now. Go ahead, Joyce.
I just wanted to say one thing that I do is I ask them one if they could clarify what they're saying because
Yeah.
I'm getting a different understanding, I think. I ask them for clarity, and then if they clarify it and I understood it how they said it, then I ask them, do you know what you just said to me?
Yes. Yes.
You know,
yes.
And now I need to know, do you understand what you just said?
Yeah.
And then my education comes to them.
Yes, yes. So perfect. So you're telling me so you're giving me a good example of like how what I was saying before about you might have one goal at one time and then later you go back and you address a different goal, right? So you made the invisible visible by asking for clarification, right? Louise?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And that's making it explicit. So that was your tactic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you moved on to another goal, which was educate the offender. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Yeah. And so the goal is to make the invisible visible. And why do we do that? We're doing it because an objective in doing it is because it's bringing the microaggression to the forefront of the person's awareness. A person cannot make any meaningful change if they don't even know what it is that they don't know, right? So why do we do that? Why do we do this? The rationale is it allows the targets and the allies and the bystanders to verbally describe what is happening, and it plants the seed for future awareness. And for the target, for the perpetrator, it indicates that they behaved or said something offensive to you or others. If you don't make it visible, why I don't even things have to be made visible. Some of you might be familiar with Paulo Freire. He was that Brazilian educator who was all about people naming, well, he's a lot of things, but one of the big things that he was about was you need to name your reality, right? You need to be able to give voice to what's happening, right? To bear witness to what's happening. One of the reasons why we, as target group members, regardless of if it's around race, gender, sex, whatever, is that we have this sort of sense of every day is because we're walking around often feeling like no one is bearing witness to what we are experiencing, right? Naming one's reality, Paulo Freire talks about, is critical for one's own liberation, right? And naming one's reality is naming the reality of individuals and allowing them to name their own reality is a necessary step in moving the perpetrator, because not all the time you care about the perpetrator. It depends on your context, your role with the person, your relationship with the person, but it's a necessary step in moving them forward too. And in work environments, I would assume that we want people to, no matter how awful they might be, sometimes, but if it's someone that's workable, we want them to move towards change, right? Okay. And then the next one is disarming the microaggression. And again, if people have examples, just step in because so we can and when we disarm the microaggression, our goal is to stop it, to stop it. Sometimes that's all, sometimes that's it. We're done here and that's it. Okay. You stop it. And sometimes, well, we move on. So it forces we stop it. It forces the perpetrator to immediately consider what they've just said or done, right? And then it allows you to immediately communicate your disagreement or disapproval from them. So you see, this is a little bit different than the first one, which was making the invisible visible. We might do both of these quickly together. We might do disarm the microaggression first, and then we go back to make the invisible visible, right? It just makes it easier to get our heads around it in terms of not feeling like we're drowning in what to do, right? to think about, take a step back and think about, okay, what's my end game here? What makes sense with this particular person in this particular situation? Maybe it's just about disarming right now. And so, but our rationale for immediately stopping or deflecting it is because it provides the targets and the allies and the bystanders with a sense of control, right? And just that, and we all need self-efficacy to react to perpetrators in the here and now. How many times have, I know for me, maybe for you, I was in a situation and I was just sort of like dumbfounded. And I felt like all my power was taken away because I did not say anything. Anything would have been better than nothing for me in that situation, but I couldn't say anything because I just didn't know how. But one of the benefits of disarming right away is it does allow you, I guess it depends on what you're saying though, but it can allow you to feel, that you have some control in what happened. And for the allies, the same thing. When the allies witness and they immediately disarm, it can make them feel that they are doing something to actively stop this type of behavior in their work environment, right? And so often I hear people say, oh, it's just too big. Things are just too big. You often hear white people say things like this when they don't know, or they feel like overwhelmed by racism and they feel like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I was like, well, if you're overwhelmed, you can imagine how overwhelmed we are, so here's something that you can do, so you immediately sort of disarming allows you to feel even more like I can do something, right? And it shows right away that you're expressing your disagreement, whether you're the target or the ally, letting people know in the moment that you're expressing disagreement. And the tactic can be right away. I don't think the tactic in expressing disagreement can be, I don't really agree. I don't agree with that, and that really makes me uncomfortable. You shouldn't say that. Oh, I don't like when you say that, and there's other ways. People find their own words to say these things. And so the rationale for forcing the perpetrator to immediately consider what he or she has just said is that it in that moment preserves the target's well-being and it prevents traumatization by or it presents traumatization or preoccupation with what it has inspired. I'm gonna fix that typo. Yeah, because things happen to you and you don't, there was no intervention, and later on you're still thinking about it. You're still thinking about it. But one of the benefits of the rationale for doing the disarming in the moment is that hopefully that will lessen some of the perseverating about it. And one of the tactics, again, is describing exactly what is happening, in that moment. I'm going to move through these quickly. So I'm going to there's so many of these. So, and then educate the offender. I'm going to drop, Amy, did you drop this we're going to drop that in the chat because they're going to break out real quickly in practice. Okay. That the file that I sent you, I think I sent this, right, Amy? Amy?
You did. Sorry, I was trying to drop it and you can't unmute while you're dropping it. Is this the strategic goal? I have a couple different handouts.
Yeah,
The strategic goal one.
Yeah.
I
So,
got it. I'm on it.
So you can so Louise, you were talking about engage. Yeah, you educate it, right? And engage in one-on-one dialogue with the perpetrator. And again, for the target, the main goal is emotional well-being, taking care of yourself. And you do whatever the hell you need to do to take care of yourself emotionally and physically, right? And you may decide, I don't give a whatever about this person right now. And that's okay, step back, okay? But educating the offender, engaging in a one-on-one dialogue with the person, how and what they said is offensive to you or others. Why do we do this? Allows the target allies bystanders the opportunity to express their experiences while maintaining a relationship with the offender. And in the work environments, oftentimes this is what we want. We want to maintain a relationship. Do we have to be their best buddy? Do we have to be their work spouse? No, but we have to work with people. So one of the things about educating the offender is that you are setting the stage for having future conversations, future collegiality with this person, right? In a way, hopefully that's meaningful. And one of the ways tactics we can use is we can differentiate, because this is one of the classic hallmarks of people not owning their stuff. It's like, well, I didn't mean. Well, you know what? I don't care what your intention was. Here's the impact. And you find ways that's palatable for you to be able to say that to a person. We can have as an objective to have more enlightened conversations with the person, exploring their biases. And the education the offender can also take place at the individual level when it happens, and it can take place later. This is why workplace training is so important, right? And also workplace affinity groups, so when, for example, I've been in organizations where they have white affinity spaces and they have white accountability partners in those white affinity spaces, and they're learning from each other. I don't really want to go through all of these because you guys have all of that, and I want to get us right into just look at the last one: seek external enforcement or support. Sometimes sometimes you don't even do the prior three, you just go right to this one, right? Regardless if you're the ally, the target, or the bystander, right? And I know for me as a target, when I'm experiencing microaggression, I need that tactic of the buddy support, right? So the objective here for me as a target is to seek the support from others, and it can be in the institution, it can be outside of the institution. To check in with myself, to make sure I'm not crazy. As someone said earlier today, you need to make sure you're not crazy. I know I need to come up with a better word than saying crazy, that you're not like, you're second guessing yourself, right? And you obviously do the self-care. And so the tactics for doing a lot of this is the buddy system, a support group. I like to use I find my own way of accessing my sense of being grounded through talking to my friends, right? So the buddy system, but also talking to nature, like being in nature, like being in for those of you who know, I like to be outdoors, not too far out, like outdoors. I don't want to be like sleeping on the floor, ground in the woods, but like I like to be out hiking. I like to be just in my garden. That grounds me, right? And so I can hear what's going on deep in my soul when I'm in those quiet spaces. And sometimes when things happen to me, that's my strategy for mitigating some of the harmful effects of the microaggressions and racism in general, right? And for some people, it's like they're gonna go and immediately report it to HR. That's fine. That's a strategy too. Report what happened to you, or share what happened to you with your supervisor, or if you feel comfortable. There's different ways that you can seek external reinforcement or support. So now we're gonna, you've got a handout, right? And so Amy dropped that in the, oh, Amy, there's another. So I need that other handout, the one that is, so you've got, I am gonna just stop sharing my screen. Okay.
What's breakout activity 1?
Yeah, no, the one that says, hold on a second. I'm gonna just go to the chat and I can see what you dropped. Strategic. Oh, let me see.
I dropped the strategic goals one that has kind of what you said on the slide, the different types of
Okay, yeah, I want them to
strategies.
have that as a reference point, right? And then I want them to have, I will do this myself. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'll drop it in just in case.
People got those okay in the chat, the strategic goal and the, okay, great.
All right, so let me just see. Oh, scenario practice. Okay. All right. I couldn't remember what was what. Yeah, that breakout activity, that was from the last session, Amy, but like.
Okay, so ignore that one.
They need the strategic, that first one that you sent, and then they need the scenario practice, right?
All right, so everybody, if you can, you should have strategic goal PDF and scenario practice document.
Okay, so how many people do we have on this call, Aim?
I can, there's like 21, 25. I
Okay.
can do 3 to 4 people in a breakout group. Does that sound
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
That's what you
okay.
like?
That's fine. So that, yeah, that would be good. So what I'd like to do is have folks if you look at the let me see if I can put I'm gonna put it up on my screen so that I can I want people to look at that scenario practice and think about a situation that you either witness, okay, you were the target or it was brought to your attention. Let me, I'll just do the screen share again.
I was going to try to drop it in the chat, but that doesn't look
Yeah,
like
that's
it's
okay.
working.
So I'm gonna just screen share again. So with the handout, the scenario practice, yeah, we probably do need to drop that in the chat too, because they're gonna be in their chat rooms and they might forget what, well, although the handout kind of sets them up for that. No, they don't need to, handout. They don't need this because it's on the handout. So, but just looking at, so you're gonna identify a microaggression that you either witnessed, were the target of, or was brought to your attention by someone else. Identify the possible intention. Remember we talked about sometimes there's a meta communication, you know, that people have, there is a meta communication, and that's the part that really is the microaggression because it's invalidating or insulting. But think about what that person's intention. So for example, when somebody says, I don't even see you as Black, you know, and what do you think their intention really was when saying that? The meta communication in that.
They meant to say, you're just like me. I don't even see you. You're
right. But they are trying to communicate, I think, to me that they're not going to be judging me about, they're not going to judge me based on who I am. I think that's what they're trying to say. Like they're trying to give me sort of like a backhanded kind of a thing to show me that they're seeing me as they're saying me more than just who I am as a Black person. I think that's what they're saying. Right.
Demisha put in the chat, you don't act like those people.
So that's a whole nother ball game. Right, right. But when they say, I don't even see, my mother-in-law used to say that, right? I don't even see you as Black. I'm like, well, I don't look like you for sure. So what are you seeing me as? Are you seeing me as a Martian? You seeing me, you know, but I think it was her way of trying to connect to say, you know, I like you. I'm not, you're being Black is not a problem for me, but that's not how I'm perceiving. I'm perceiving is that it's uncomfortable for you to notice my Blackness, right? You need to see me just like you in order for you to be comfortable with me. And that's a problem because my Blackness is my experience, which makes me different than you because your experience has been different, right? And so there's a whole level of communication in that statement, a meta communication. So I've identified on my little handout here, you know, that you guys can, what that meta communication was. I identified what the intention was, right? Now I have to decide what my goal is going to be, right? Now, is my goal going to be to just immediately disarm, or is it going to be to make visible what was really being said? So the making visible means I have to point out the meta communication, right? Or am I going to what's the other thing I was going to say? I'm like losing my thought here. Am I going to seek external reinforcement, right? I'm going to educate. Am I going to seek external reinforcement? And I'm going to disarm. What am I going to do, right? So I have to decide. And then what's my intervention going to be, right? Now, we've only talked about the interventions really kind of like this at the individual level, but there is a layer of the macro intervention, which we're not going to do right now. So let me unshare the screen. And Amy, if you can split people into groups and
Yep.
like, so
Zoom
I'm
is
guessing
gonna
that.
send you automatically into a group.
Wait, no, don't do
Not
it yet.
yet?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, because I have to tell them a little bit more. So I don't think you're gonna have time. Well, maybe you will, to each person, this group, there's 3 in a group, Amy? 3?
Yeah.
Okay,
2 or
then
3.
you will. Then you will. So each person will get a chance to to do their own scenario, right? And share with the group. Initially, I was gonna say, group come up with one, right? So among the 3 of you, decide, each person share one, or from one person volunteers one, and that's the one that we would report back out to the large group. But I think to give everybody an opportunity to really just reflect on their own experiences at work, why don't each person come up with one and you share it and talk about each other in the small group. So you're going to name the microaggression that the witness or experience, the interpretation or the meta communication, the intention of the person you think, the goal that you were going to the goal of your intervention, and what tactic you're going to use. Okay, is that clear for everybody? Or did I go through that so super fast? Can you just do this? Oh, wow, that's making me a little
That's
bit
good,
weird.
yeah.
Okay, so it's 1:16. How can we do this in like what's reasonable, Amy? We just go large group share out like after, and that's it. So
Yeah, so give them 10 minutes.
mm,
That seemed like, no, not enough.
that's funny. I asked you and then I'm telling you no. That's all.
All right.
I know. Let's
okay.
give them
Joyce,
15 minutes.
It's 1:28, just so you know. I heard you say it's 1:16.
Oh, you know what? That's the date. 1:16. Thank you, lady. Yeah,
So,
okay.
thank
All
you,
right, thank
Megan.
you. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay,
So if we give them 15 minutes,
Can you
we'll
guys
have
do that
15
10
minutes
minutes?
left.
And if you don't, can you do it in 10 minutes? All right, yeah.
Yeah.
10
We'll
minutes,
give
okay.
them 10 minutes and then that'll give us 20 minutes on the other side.
Right, and then I can go get Haggis and let him out.
All right. Okay, so
Okay,
Zoom's going to send you into your rooms. Zoom created. Good luck. See you on the other side.
Okay. Is that everybody?
I
Nope.
think so. I think probably because Gwen's on the phone. I don't know if it's
She
working for her to get into
should
a
be
room.
able to join. No, she's in room 2. It says
Okay.
that she's in room 2.
Okay. It
I'm
says
going to need to
Delete it,
leave.
though.
I'm sorry.
It's not letting
Oh,
me.
okay. That's okay, Jude.
Thanks. Great session.
Thank you.
But Gwen is still showing up like not in a group, but it says she's in a group.
I know it's very.
It says not join, or maybe she doesn't want to join. Wait, but she's still online.
It's
Okay.
green light that she's in the group. So
Okay, yeah, she's gone now. Okay.
Shelley,
Wait a
did you
minute,
get a
she's still
group
there.
okay?
Wait a minute. Let me message Gwen.
Sheila? Oh, Sheila, you weren't. All right, let me put
You know,
you.
I went into room 5, but I just got interrupted and now I have to leave. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Oh, okay.
I just gotta go to a quick phone call. So I'm gonna try to stay in, but
Okay.
No problem.
All right, I'm messaging her now, Gwen. Oh, now she's gone. Okay, now she's there. Okay, now I don't see her. Okay. All right,
Okay.
so she's gone.
You
All
know
right.
about Sheila's waiting, but everybody else looks like they're in the.
Let's deal with Sheila. She's not in the room yet?
She said she was. She had to take a phone call, so she was.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
Sorry.
join back
Okay.
on the other side.
All right. Okay. Boy, I'm looking at 1:16. I'm like, wait a minute. That's today's date.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. All right. I gotta get up for a second. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna run to the bathroom myself. It looks like everybody's good though, right? Except Louise is in a room by. No, she's not in a room by herself.
Okay.
friends, I'll
Everything's fine.
stay here and if anybody comes back, I'll help them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Amy.
It's always so good to see you. Were you Mary Beth for a minute there when you came right in?
I was using her Zoom a little while ago, so.
I was like, Mary Beth's here. And then I'm like, no, it's really mine.
Hi, Kelsey.
Okay,
It's
let me-
always,
Hi, my day. Whoops, I
it's
was
always
muted.
so good to see you.
Are you like in another country or something?
Yeah.
You
Always.
are, right? I saw
Yeah,
that the other day.
I think my day is like, I mean, I'm sorry, I think that Kelsey is like an expat now, kind of.
I am.
Ah,
You're
Yeah.
in the illustrious club of the expats.
yeah.
You know, I belong to this Facebook group called Blacksit. It's for Black people who want to exit the United States. Blacksit, get it? Like Brexit, Blacksit.
Mhm.
And like there's all these Black people living their best lives all over the globe. And you know what the #1 destination is for Black expats? I was really surprised because I thought, why are people going further away? Actually, it's Mexico, according to this group anyway. And they say it's because it's close, right? And a lot of us like the idea of being able to get to our family members quickly. The living is pretty decent, and you know, cost of living is pretty good. So
It's so funny for people, like, because of the narrative that Trump used about Mexico. It's really funny to think about Americans running to Mexico to get away from this place.
I know. Oh, you know what? My battery is low. Hold on a second. On my phone. I gotta
We don't want to lose ya here at the end.
No, oh my
Taken us so
God.
far, like you really have. Thank you so much. This is right on top of the couple hours you already did. I'm so grateful that people are still hanging around, and we are excited to hear about how your disarming microaggressions conversations went.
Yeah. Okay, so I need to well,
You
people
feel like your power is in.
I want to get myself situated here. Hold on a second.
Oh, Sue, thank you, Sue. In the chat said that you guys didn't really have enough time to get through much of anything, but you did take some notes about what you talked about. That's good.
Who's that? Sue,
Sue Buckles. Our Sue. Yay.
okay.
You want to have Sue jump right in? She's
Yeah.
already ready to go.
Okay. So I gotta go back and I'm gonna share my screen. Well, actually, no, let's just see what people, because I
Yeah.
want to be able to look at people. Okay. So I don't remember who was in which group, but I'd like to hear people. So instead of just sort of doing like going through every group, I think we'd like to have some people just volunteer, like what a scenario and what their strategy, what the microaggression was, what the interpretation and so forth, and the other things on the handout. So does anybody want to volunteer?
I'll always volunteer.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, so I wrote down someone else's, but I'm going to let her speak for herself. The one I shared was as an ally witnessing a supervisor criticizing the clothing of 2 dark-skinned Latinas, but not criticizing the clothing of the light-skinned Latinas. And
can you give me the words that were used, just so that I just
this came back to me. So what they said was they came back to me, and the people who experienced it and said I was taken aside for my clothing. And both people came to me individually and told me that. And then I also witnessed the supervisor saying Yeah, she needs to think more carefully about what she wears to work. And the meta communication that I was hearing was, way too sexy, not professional for work. I mean, she said that too, but she didn't say that to the women. She said that to me. She didn't say that to them. To them, she just said, "Hey, we have a dress code. You need to look at the dress code." And I feel like it was very intentional to put them in their place. I feel like that was the intention, to put them in their place. Kind of like, light skinned Latinas have a certain role here. Dark skinned Latinas are in a different spot. That's how I witnessed it, and I tried to provide moral support for the women, and I also brought it to the attention of leadership.
Okay, so then so your strategic goal in that was then, based on what you just did, what you told me you did, what do you think that your goal was? So if we look at that, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but like, did you make it sound like you did a little bit of everything? You made the invisible visible?
Yeah.
And then you, I think you disarmed too.
Yep. Yeah. I called them out. I said, this is how it looks to me.
Mhm.
And I gave them examples, and I made it very concrete, and I documented it. And then I took both women aside and said, I don't think this is fair. And if you choose to, complain about it, I'll support you.
Okay. So you did like this one, sometimes all four goals, you address all four, and you use, sometimes in the process of addressing one goal, you are using some of the same tactics, if you look at that handout, across goals, right? You're using there's overlap with the tactics with the goals. Thank you. Anybody else? That you witnessed and that you talked about in your group, or that you were the target of?
I can share mine.
Okay.
It's Louise.
Hmm?
So I shared how I was called into a meeting with my supervisor and the boss. And my supervisor's complaint was that I talked with my hands. And while she's complaining that I talk with my hands, she's talking with her hands. So when she finished talking, I said to her, well, I talk with my hands, but you're talking with your hands as well. So what is your point here? Everybody uses their hands to express themselves when they're talking.
So, Louise, it sounds like you were immediately disarming, right? Because you
Absolutely.
Louise says not absolutely, but absolutely, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, and you made the visible by, I think you asked for clarification. I'm looking at my notes. You undermine what she was saying, the microaggression by asking for clarification, right? And I'm just trying to think, what else did you do?
Right.
You disarmed, you described what is happening. That was a tactic that you used. You expressed a disagreement. Yeah. See all the strategies.
And I asked her what was the difference.
What's the difference? So
yeah, and I asked her what was the difference between me talking with my hands and her talking with her hands.
Yeah.
What's the difference between expression?
Right. And
whether if I'm doing it or you're doing it.
Right. And then sometimes, Louise, like if you want to do like more educating the offender, you know, you can point out, like, if you guys have that in front of you, I don't want to put up the PowerPoint. One of the tactics under educating the offender is to point out commonalities, right? Because oftentimes people have these, their microaggression is sitting on top of a stereotype about a particular group, you know, and really what she's essentially saying is that you're a Black woman and that you have this demonstrative way of communicating that I'm uncomfortable with, okay? And, you know, I was married to an Italian for 29 years. I mean, please. Okay, so, you know, and I know that Mark's laughing because he knows Carlo and Mark used to joke about this all the time. I was like, the first time I drove in a car with Carlo, I was like, listen, I don't know what you Italians are doing, like when you, but listen, when you got this Black woman in the car, you need to keep your hands on the wheel, okay? I don't care, you know, your hands got to be on the wheel. And so it's not just you, Louise, as a Black person who communicates with gestures, right? So pointing out, you know, using gestures is really something that a lot of different ethnic groups do, right? It's just we have different ways of communicating. Some groups are not very demonstrative with their gestures and others are. Like, for example, you know, I know that when you compare Italians to other Europeans, you know, there's a difference, right? And that's not a stereotype. You know, we look at comparative culture, you know, when you compare cultures to cultures, some cultures have a certain way of, you know, doing things, the norms of communicating that's different than other cultures, right? So if you wanted to, Louise, and you wanted to do some of the educating further, again, because it's not your responsibility at all, right, to do the educating. But if you were inclined to, you might point out that commonality. That's one of your strategies or your tactics. Anybody else? Thanks, Louise.
I'll go, Joyce.
Okay.
So I don't know if Carlo ever shared his experiences with you, but there are times when, and so my husband is Black, and there are times when he's not in the room and someone will say, well, I don't see color. And so as I said, you know, to my small group, I said, I use it as an opportunity to just stop them because it makes no sense. And my first reaction is, so you don't see gender when you're talking to someone?
Yes.
So, you know, so because I think part of it is not to see the totality of a person, or at least what they're presenting, is to deny what their journey may have been to date.
Exactly.
And to factor that into whatever your thoughts are at the time. So it's one of those things I just can't let go.
Yeah. And so what you did a lot of things when you make that response. You tell me what you think you did.
Well, you know, as I said to the group, I said, a lot of times I think the intention, because we talk about the difference between intention and impact. The intention is not necessarily egregious in my mind. It's one of trying to come across as supportive. And so for me, it's like, I hear you and I sense this is your intention. Let me just tell you from my experience of being married to Henry for 30 plus years, is that not to acknowledge what a Black man's journey has been to date is not to understand.
It's an invalidation.
So I would recommend that you do see color the next time.
So you actually did a couple things. I think you clearly made visible what was invisible, the meta communication, because what they were really trying to say was that Henry's experience is like their experience, because color doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter, but that's in fact not true, because who Henry is, it comes with how Henry shows up in the world, right? So you point out to you really made clear to them that not seeing color is really an invalidation because of knowing that color comes with different experiences. So you were clear to point that out, and as you said, the intention, regardless of what their intentions were, I think by you saying what the real impact is of a statement like that, make some shift away from their intention, because I'm sure they were thinking, well, but I didn't mean anything by it.
Right,
They can't
absolutely.
deny that.
Right.
That's not, their intention is not even up for argument once you point
Yeah.
out the reality. So you made the invisible visible by naming and making the meta communication explicit. You disarmed because you expressed disagreement. That was the tactic that you used. And let's see, what else did you do? And you did educating because you differentiated between intent and impact.
Mhm.
Did you know you were doing all of that, Mark?
I do now.
Okay. All right. I
Thank
think,
you.
yeah. Anybody else? We got 5 minutes left, but thanks. All right. Somebody.
Oh, go ahead. I could do mine, but I don't know if I can do it in 5 minutes, but I'll try.
Well, you're gonna have to do it in less than 5
Okay,
minutes.
I'll do it really quick. Mine is related to the recent encampment at the RV. I got involved. There's a group of women calling themselves Project Priceless, who were formerly sex trafficked and are living on the streets. Their housing shut down in the fall, and they've been homeless ever since. They've made multiple attempts to try to get into the shelter, and it was organic. They wanted to make themselves visible. They made themselves visible by setting up an encampment at the RV. I was there when they set up on Tuesday night, mostly helping with food and bringing tents. But the thing is that there are a lot of not microaggressions. They sent 30 police officers to sweep it the next day. Oh yeah, it's really awful what the city did. But what I want to say is the letter that the city manager put out is two things that is filled with microaggressions, saying that they made the problem of homelessness worse in the city. So they targeted intentionally 3 of the helpers, arrested them, charged 2 with resisting arrest.
Okay, and so then how did you intervene?
So the only thing that I wasn't there when the police came, what I intervened was I went to court to support the 3 helpers who were thrown into handcuffed, thrown into the paddy wagon and called troublemakers. Now they're I don't know if that's a microaggression. It's pretty. So I went to court to support the helpers, and I'm kind of not knowing where to go from here, but trying to find ways to still support the women. And but the whole thing with what the city manager put out, it makes it totally twisted in it. All the microaggressions added up to make it look like these women were the problem and that homelessness isn't the real, it isn't, and that the city treats their homelessness with the unhoused population with dignity. And, they sent 30 police officers.
So I think, so it sounds like to me, I'm trying to rush you because I think that you did an external, your intervention was an external reinforcement, right? Like, so you relied on the court system to make the intervention, which is fine, right? That's a good thing to do. And I'm sure when you were at court, you probably made visible the invisible, right? So some of the messages that was in the letter that were not like, you pointed out the subtext, the meta communication when you were in court, I'm sure, and so even though we can take these larger actions, societal actions, we still are in many ways doing some of the other kinds of interventions, the educating, the disarming, and so forth. So thank you for that. Thanks, Barbara. So, I mean, we're at 1:59. Thank you so much, everyone. We dropped some things in the chat. There's the original, the first the article, Microaggressions in Everyday Life. That's the one that really was at the forefront of breaking down the whole idea of micro invalidations, micro assaults, and so forth. Darwin Sue was like, and his colleagues are he's like the leading person on talking about this. And then the second article is like the framework for today's, like how to frame your intervention. And then there's also something that I didn't get a chance to do, but I think it's important, is how you can sort of tease out the organizational interventions versus the larger institutional, the social the institutional interventions, for your organization, and then like just social interventions in general of particular issues. So that's a Word document that I sent. So that's it. I appreciate everyone being here. Amy, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. Everybody should be sending a kudos to Mr. Haggis for not acting a fool today. Because he usually does if I'm have to be on a call. So I'm thrilled about that. Anything else,
Joyce,
Amy?
thank you so much. I
Yeah.
know like this
Yeah.
work that you do is so important and awesome. And it really, thank you to everyone here, because I know it means the world that people care about this and care enough to try to intervene to make it better.
Great.
It's so appreciated. We're
Thank
really
you.
grateful. Thank you so much.
All right. And
Just
Amy
were
and Kelsey,
awesome.
you stay on the call. I need to just check in with you. Bye, everybody. Good to see friends here.
Bye. Thanks
Bye.
again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Amy,